Hello, so my name is Malin, and I just finished watching Criminal Minds, and I spent 5 months watching this show and recording data for every single episode. I recorded various points, and I want to share the graphs and various data I've collected in this video. As a disclaimer, so I don't get copyright infringement, I do not own these characters, did not create these characters. They have nothing to do with the show. I'm using images for educational purposes, and I took the images myself, etc. So this is part 2 to a video where I'm going to explain the crimes and criminals and other various things about the show Criminal Minds. There is a part 1 which is just about the characters. You don't necessarily have to watch that first, but might give a little more context. So to start off, I just want to clarify some things. So serial killing in the context of these graphs is 2 or more victims in separate incidents, whereas homicide is 1 incident of the actual death, and spree killing is multiple incidents over the course of 1 day. I put homicide and spree killer in the same category just because not everyone died on a spree. Secondly, abduction is over 18, kidnapping is under 18. If multiple victims of different ages, then I just put abduction. If one or the other is serial, then the majority of the victims is marked. Additionally, if the victim was 18, if they ever actually said the age, I just went by if they were in high school or not. Mayhem is an actual crime. It's like if you were to cut off someone's arm or poke out their eyes, but they ultimately live, that's mayhem. So in the context of this, mayhem is torture where the victims survive and are released. It also covers abduction and serial killer, and it was made so I could avoid marking 3 categories. Basically, if someone is abducted and tortured, but they're not released, that would just be under abduction or serial killer, whichever fit. A character implies anything about a character's personal life that appears between the opening theme and the catching of the criminal, or if the character is a victim of a crime. And finally, a terrorism is marked if that was the motive, no matter what the actual crime was. I'm not going to read all this, but I just have a list of the most confusing episodes from a data perspective. Usually it's just the amount of criminals that should be marked were unclear. In 2 cases, in the storm, there was like entire groups that were the criminals, so I just marked no criminals. And the same went for 300, where an entire cult could be charged with a crime, and so I marked none. So some general observations about the show. Okay, yeah, most characters came following season 9, which is the last season that Blake was in. It's after Prentice left and all the other characters began leaving. Ratings are often high when BAU is the victims of crimes. Ratings are the highest when Reed is the victims of the crime, but also ratings are often highest when just Reed has anything to do, when there's just a plot about Reed. If you watch the character point, you'll know that he has the highest average rating of all the characters. A majority of the episodes took place in California, specifically LA. This is because the show was filmed in California and most often filmed in LA, which just makes sense. The most criminals actually participating in crimes was 7 males and 1 female in supply and demand. If I remember that episode correctly, they were human trafficking, and these were the people that were actually running the human trafficking ring. 6 episodes had crime committed outside the United States, and over the course of the show, 14 people worked in the BAU, 17 if you include Jordan Todd, Ashley Seaver, and Stephen Walker, who were all there for less than a season. And also, characters were often replaced by someone with the same general description. For example, Elle, Prentice, Blake, Callahan, and Lewis were all dark-haired women, and Gideon and Rossi were both just old dudes. More observations. Only 3 criminals in the entire show got away. We have Shane Weiland, who was a kidnapper from Into the Woods, Darlene Beckett, a serial killer from the Pack, and an unnamed man, the serial killer in blood relations. What's interesting is that Shane Weiland and the unnamed man both had cliffhanger endings where they showed the possibility that they continued to commit crimes. Whereas Darlene Beckett had a partner, the partner was arrested and she got away. If I remember the episode correctly, she killed for revenge, and so it's probably unlikely that she continued. The 4 pregnancies throughout the show all resulted in baby boys. Actually, there were 5 pregnancies, and the last one was Simmons' wife in season 15. She had a baby girl. After leaving, Elle is only mentioned a handful of times, and the only time I actually wrote down that she was mentioned and where they talked about her the most was in the last episode of season 11, when they alluded to her murdering a criminal. Okay, so no character appears in every episode. However, Matthew Gary Gubler, who plays Reed, is credited in all of them, but he did miss 13 in the later seasons. Kirsten Vangsness, who plays Garcia, is credited in 321, so she missed 3 episodes, but I think there may have been more that she didn't appear in but was credited in. I did not keep track of those. And then JJ has the 3rd most episodes, despite not appearing in the pilot most of season 6 and going on maternity twice. Many season finales later, many 8, The Replicators, season 10, Callahan's niece, season 12 with Scratch escaping and Reed in jail, and then season 15 with Lynch. 3 episodes were told in flashbacks from a main character, starting with Entropy, told from Reed, Sick Day, told from JJ, and Chameleon, told from Rossi. And as I said, most seasons end with a cliffhanger that starts the next season or a 2-part episode. The only seasons that don't do this are season 2, which was a continuation of an earlier episode, season 8, again, season 8 and 10, which were both being set up throughout the season, and season 14. And then after season 12, when Prentice is in charge, they all start to call each other by their first names. The biggest exceptions is they still call Prentice Prentice and Reed Reed and JJ JJ because that's a nickname. But the rest of them, for the most part, they're on a first name basis. And finally, Lewis and Callahan are the only characters to never be a victim. However, both of them had loved ones become victims. So something I noticed about the sets in the show was that a lot of times when they go into a teen's bedroom or a kid's bedroom, they have a bulletin board with photos and random words stuck on it. And they're most prevalent in Risky Business, which is what this yellow one is. But it occurs a lot other times. I found these photos by just going back through random episodes that had teens and hoping I'd find it. So these are just the first 3 I found. There are many others though. But if you look in this one, you can see it says girl and hot and there's a pair of lips. This one also just says girls, and it's got some people that look like they're cut out of magazines. There's a word right there, but I can't read it. So something I noticed between teenagers' bedrooms in this show. Next we have Brent and Sandy. This random couple gets attacked by the unsub that gets away in the cliffhanger ending of Blood Relations, which is what this picture is from. This is the ending of Blood Relations. And then they appear again, the same actors credited by the same names in The Tall Man. So I feel like this is the girl and the tall man, Sandy, and then this is the boy, the man, the tall man, Brent, and it's the same actors, which I guess means they survived the unnamed man from Blood Relations. Also, this show is very formulaic in that as I watched, I noticed there was a pattern to how episodes started. So I attempted to make a flowchart. It's a little messy, first flowchart I ever made. Just wanted to show the possible beginnings. So you start here. Does your episode start with a person in a dark or unusual place? Most often it does. Is the person being followed or harassed by someone? If they are, then who becomes a victim? Is it the person being followed or the person following them? Because sometimes it's the person following them, which is kind of a switcheroo, making you think the creepy person is the killer, but then that person ends up dying. Or it goes exactly the way you expect when the person being followed becomes a victim. Or if there is no person being followed, then is it the criminal? If it's not the criminal, it's probably someone finding a dead body. Or if it is the criminal, which can expect this, is the criminal's face shown? If it is, the episode could follow or show the criminal side of the crime. And if not, then there is probably a plot twist about the killer. Usually it's they have the wrong guy or it's a woman. If none of that happens, it's a matter of does it start with a BAU character? If not, then the episode probably breaks the formula. And I always like those episodes where they don't follow anything in this flowchart. But if it does start with a BAU character, then sometimes it switches where it's, are they hearing the case now? Has the scene switched to a person? Sometimes it'll start with them watching the news when they see the crime, and usually those are the more local cases in Virginia or DC, and then it switches back to over here. But sometimes if it doesn't switch back to the crime or the criminals, then is one of the characters missing or in danger? If yes, then that's probably the episode. If not, then again, it probably breaks the patterns. An easy way of thinking about this is that most episodes either go criminal, BAU, the criminal doing something weird and murderous, theme song, quote, BAU, or if there's a bigger B plot about a BAU character, then goes BAU, criminal, BAU, theme song, quote, BAU. Finally, victims often die or are shown getting hurt or being captive, or the criminal does something weird right before commercial breaks. And this pattern, all these patterns are most strongly established after the first few seasons of the show. Next are the episode titles. So I made a word cloud of the most common words and titles. 2-part episodes have been removed, such as The Fisher King, and these episodes were all just replaced with the word character because these are their names, with the exception of Lauren. That was how Ian Doyle knew her, so I replaced it anyway. Obviously, character names are the most common. but then you also have words like night, blood, broken, death, devils, and these are exactly the words you'd expect from a crime show. But then on the other hand, you have things like angel, seven, mirror, love, our, brothers. But these are the only words that show up multiple times. There's a lot of words that only show up once. These are the only words that show up more than once in the titles. And continuing to talk about the character name episodes, there are 6 of them that are just a character's first name, and 3 episodes have a victim's first name. In the instance of a character's first name, that person is usually a victim or targeted, or it just ends with them going after the criminal on their own. Like in Lauren, Prentice goes after Ian Doyle alone, and he, quote, dies. In Derek, Morgan is abducted, and he goes after the criminal 2 episodes later. Spencer doesn't exactly go after Kat Adams, but he does attack her 9 episodes later when he gets out of prison. And same thing goes for Luke. The biggest exception to this is Penelope, because Garcia is not an actual FBI agent, and JJ, because there is no criminal. The episode's about her getting transferred. Additionally, there are 3 episodes that are a victim's first name. In all of these, they're the name of little girls. Hope is named a little girl who was kidnapped years earlier. Gabby is named a little girl who gets kidnapped in that episode. And Ashley is named a little girl who died that makes the criminal kidnap other little girls. So I have some rating correlations, and all the ratings anywhere in this slideshow are taken from IMDb. The show itself is rated 8.1, but the average episode rating is 7.70. Here are the season averages. The highest rated season is season 2 at just over 8, which makes sense because one of the 3 highest rated episodes is in this season, whereas the lowest is season 11, which is interesting to me because although the 3 lowest rated episodes are in there, it also includes the highest rated episode, which is probably the only reason that it's this high. But I also have the average rate for each type of crime. So you see serial killer is the most common, and it's just a little below the average, whereas abduction is the second most common, and it's above the average. The lowest is mayhem, if you remember what that is, and then stalking is the highest. And then other and terrorism, those are also pretty high. So let's switch over to Excel to show this graph, but this is the graph I made just marking the crime and the rating directly. So if you look, obviously the blue is the serial killer, which is just the most common crime. But if you look specifically at the highest ones throughout this whole thing, there's a lot of abductions and others that stick out above the rest. There's a kidnapping one. Seems to be a lot of abductions, others. Down here, you look at the bottom, you again have serial killers because it's the most common, but the lowest 3 are all serial killer and abduction. And then if you look at the less common crimes like arson, bombing, or rapist, those are hard to find because there's so few of them. Like the first 3, you have 4 crimes, and then there's a rapist. You got more arson in like season 4. There's 2 bombings here within like 20 episodes, which I thought was unusual. And then one of the final episodes was bombing, and one of the final ones was stalker. And the next graph I have is the plots that I was talking about. The blue is any episode that doesn't have a plot about a character. But if you look, each character has their own colors, makes it easier to identify them. If you look at the top ones, a lot of them are Reed or Hotch. Hotch is this like more medium green, and Reed is the dark purple. A lot of the highest ones are him, and that pattern really continues. You have JJ here. The yellow is all of them. But if you look towards the bottom ones, you have a lot of Garcia, which is the hot pink. You have a lot of those towards the bottom. Here you have a lot of Reed plots. That's just because he was in jail. The lowest 3, these were the first 3 episodes to not feature Reed, and immediately he comes back. I thought that was very interesting, and I read the reviews on IMDb for these 3 episodes, and several of them actually did mention they gave a low rating because of no Reed. And if you look at the orange dots, that means 2 or 3 characters were in the plot of that episode. And if you look at all of them are Reed, you have Hotch, Reed Prentice, and JJ. the next one. Reed and Walker, separate plots though, and then Reed and Prentice, and then Reed and Garcia, Reed and JJ, and then the only one without Reed was the very last one with Alves and Simmons. Only there are also several deaths that occur in the show. The first being the death of Haley, Hotch's ex-wife. The second being Prentice's, again, quote, death, because she doesn't actually die. The third being Maeve, then Strauss, then Gideon, and then finally Walker dies. And the third rating graph I have on here is just the ratings themselves. I sorted them by season. The horizontal black lines are each season's average, so you can compare all the episodes to the average. And I marked the two highest and the lowest rated for each season. And it's hard to, they're not on top of each other, but you can kind of correspond a lot of the highest rated ones to the characters. So that one's Reed, that one's also Reed. This one's Prentice. Also Reed, this one's all of them. You can correlate all of them. Interestingly, I think I mentioned this season 11 has the highest and lowest rated episodes. Yeah, so those are the rating graphs I have. Oh, if you look at the average season rating, again, season 2 is the highest, but then it very much evens out from season 5 to season 9 before dipping down again and then going back up right at the end. Okay, next we have the crimes being committed in the episodes. Okay, so first, I just want to clarify again that serial killer abduction is a very common double crime along with serial killer kidnapping. In this case, either the criminal was killing and abducted or kidnapped someone with no intent of murdering them, or the murder victims were being held for at least 24 hours, which gave them, a longer opportunity to be found. The other category had 17 episodes and consisted of hostages, poisoning, proving innocence, finding a CIA mole, child porn, bank robbery, attempted murder, occult, human trafficking, bank robbery, drugging, hitman being caught, attempted murder, drug possession, attempted murder, hostages, and mail crime. Mail crime, I didn't know what to call that because I don't think there's a technical term for sending body parts through the mail, so I decided on mail crime. The mayhem category consisted of experimentation, where the killer was switching the legs of people and letting them go. Lobotomies, where again, lobotomizing people, letting them go. Torture, cutting, drugging. I was not sure at all what to mark for the crime for the season 12 premiere. This is what I decided on because it's what he was doing. Acid attacks and disfigurement. In all of these, the victims were released. So here's a chart of them. You can see how many times they occurred in comparison to the others. As I was watching the show, I would update it after I watched a handful of episodes, and I would look at the graphs. And serial killer almost always hovered right around 2/3. It's actually just below it, usually around 64%. Except for in season 5, there was an unusually high amount of serial killers, and it actually got up to 67% at one point, I believe. But at the end, it is 2 episodes shy of being exactly 2/3. So the homicide spree is one category because not everyone died on a spree. Additionally, there were 12 sprees, and if you go back and see there are 32 in that category. So there were 12 that were actually sprees and 20 that were just one homicide. One episode revolved around 3 simultaneous crimes. The episode was Sick Day, where the criminal was a serial killer because he kidnapped children, held them for a little bit, then killed them. But he killed them by setting a building on fire with arson. They profiled him as an arsonist, so I had to mark all 3. It's the only one I had to do that. And the most common crime combinations were obviously serial killer abduction, serial killer kidnapping, and homicide kidnapping, which is basically just killing the parents and taking the kid. The states that they went to, for all intents and purposes, I only marked the states that they actually went to, and only of those states that they went to had a crime scene in them, and that's why they were there. If they went to another state to interview like a past victim or a suspect, I did not include that. So first, this is just simply where they went. I forgot to mark Morgan's hometown, but his is in Chicago. There were quite a few episodes from there. There's a couple from Reed's home state of Nevada. There's one of Blake's home state in Missouri, one of JJ's in Pennsylvania, one of Rossi's in New York. Most of the characters live in DC, and they work at Quantico in Virginia, so a lot of the episodes where their victims are from here. Additionally, the show is filmed in LA, mentioned that earlier. That's why these 2 are the most common, because it was filmed here and it took place here. These green triangles just show that the only occurrence of those states was in an episode with multiple states. So the Jamaica was the Fisher Game Part 1. It was Jamaica and Virginia. The Canada was To Hell and Back, which was Michigan and Canada. And this one was Nebraska, Iowa, and Arkansas, Tennessee. These are just the smaller states you can't see. DC was also pretty common. And the international one, there were 3 in Mexico. One of these was a double state one. It was New Mexico and Mexico. Oh crap, that's not even Nevada, is it? That's New Mexico. I'm bad at geography. It's the international one. 3 in Mexico, 1 in Jamaica, 1 in Canada, and then Barbados was the backdoor pilot for the international crimes. I made a time-lapse map graph to further illustrate exactly like the order they showed up in. This is going to be a very low quality recording of my time-lapse map graph because I cannot get it to work with Zoom. So next, the most common crime in each state, obviously serial killer is most common, and obviously some of these, there was only 1 episode from them. But the ones that weren't serial killer was New Hampshire, Iowa, and Missouri. There was a tie between serial killer abduction. South Dakota was only 1 episode, and that episode was serial killer abduction, so it's obviously a tie. Mississippi, Alabama, Kentucky, and Delaware all had kidnapping as the most common, and the 1 Connecticut episode was abduction. And then Wyoming had 1 episode, it was homicide, spree killer. And then there's Indiana, which had 4 episodes, a 5-way tie between 5 crimes of homicide, arson, serial killer abduction, and bombing. So that one's an outlier in terms of the most common. And then the order of states appearing. Obviously, Washington was the first one, and South Dakota or North Dakota and Hawaii never appeared. But obviously, the most appeared in season 1 when they had to actually go to places, and it's the first time they were actually going places. And then season 2 had quite a few, but then by season 6, there weren't as many new states, and there were none from seasons 10 or 11. And then season 12 and season 14, they were just literally filling them all in. These all appeared in the last couple episodes of season 14. And an observation was the most common double states was Virginia and the surrounding states, such as Kentucky and Maryland. There are no Virginia DC doubles because I usually looked for if they were establishing shots of like the Capitol or the Washington Monument, or if they ever mentioned the Metro PD. That's how I determined if it was DC. And the last victim. I added this category because I realized that in a lot of crime shows and serial killer movies, the last victim always lives. I'm talking about fictional ones here, but the last victim lives because you don't want to see them die. You're kind of rooting for them to get out of there, and the FBI or the police, they come in just in time to save them. And so I once again made a flow chart to illustrate how I determined if the last victim lived. To start, there was most often episodes ending with a hostage situation or a standoff with the FBI. And then if there was 1 or more victim, it was just a matter of did they live? If there were more victims, are they saved all at once? Did they live? If at least 1 person lived, then it was yes. If they all died, then it was obviously no. But if they were saved individually, then it's a matter of whoever the last one in danger was. Did they live? If there was no hostage situation or standoff, then was there like a bomb or a terrorist threat or a large-scale attack planned? There were quite a few of those, and then it was a matter of did it go off? What's interesting is none of them went off, so this side could be completely ignored because none of them went off. So all of the episodes that end with that were all yes. And if there was none of that, then it was usually just the last victim was killed before the criminal was caught, and usually those ones were no. And finally, sometimes the answer was NA. NA means that the killer from that episode threatens someone, usually a main character, and then the episode ends and it's like a cliffhanger or a 2-parter. So once again, my graph is not working, so I'll also explain it from here, and I'll show you the graph. So the NAs are the Fish Game part one, when Ellis shot, the big gang when Reed is abducted, lo-fi car explodes. It doesn't even show who, but it turns out it was Hotch. Our darkest hour was a kid named Ellie who got kidnapped. Hit, a bank explodes with characters inside. Angels, Reed is shot. Green light, Reed's mom is abducted. Believer, Reed and Garcia are abducted. Face off, Reed faints after an explosion. This is the graph about the last victim. As you can see, 83% of the time they live. This slowly increased over the course of the show. And in 46 episodes, they don't live. And then the 9 are obviously the ones where it's not applicable. In all of the NAs, though, they do live. Oh, yes, there were only a handful of times where the no was because the FBI got there like just a moment too late. And the first time this happened was in 100 when they all arrived just a minute too late to save Haley. There are a handful of others. I have them written down somewhere. I noticed that when watching a reunion between a victim and a family, Rossi often comments, like, we don't see enough of that. While I do see a lot of people grieving over past murdered relatives, I do have an 83% success rate in saving the last victim, which is pretty high. And most of the time when they say this, it's when a singular person was abducted or kidnapped, and that single person is the focus of the episode. And they save them more often than 83% of the time. I don't know the exact number though. Okay, next we move on to the criminals. So here we have there's 16% were female and 84% were male. There were 374 male, 71 female, which means that there were 445 total criminals. And again, I correlated the number of criminals to the crimes being committed. So there were a lot of times, there were, I think, at least 100 episodes with multiple criminals that had to be counted. It was usually a pair, but occasionally it would be more if it was like a group that was committing crimes. Also, the most common crimes of criminals by their gender. So obviously, majority of episodes are serial killers, so majority of their crimes are serial killing. And since there are less female, their numbers are smaller overall, but it's a similar ratio, except that abduction was a lot higher than kidnapping for male, but it's a lot closer with female. You do the math, male, this totals out to be 1.7 times as many abductions for male, whereas it is 1.5 times as many abductions for females. And then you can pretty much self-explanatory for the numbers, but then down here, there were 20 homicides committed by men and 7 sprees committed by men, 5 homicides committed by females and 5 sprees committed by females. I think 1 or 2 of the sprees was a male-female team committing sprees. And this doesn't all add up just because sometimes they're working together. Some observations. There were 290 episodes with at least 1 male criminal and 65 episodes with at least 1 female criminal. The average rating for males was 7.67 and the average for females was 7.85. I like finding correlations to ratings. I'm not sure if there's an actual correlation there. I just want to point that out. Only 6 episodes had more than 1 female. There were 2 in The Pact, 2 in Gabby, 3 in Seek and Destroy, 2 in Green Light and Red Light, and then 2 in Date Night. There were 3 children who were killers. There was a serial killer who, I don't know how old he was, but he was a child. In Boogeyman, in A Shade of Grey, there was a kid who killed his brother. And in Innocence, there was a serial killer. He was 13, but still pretty young for a serial killer. The criminal in Conflicted had DID, although he was a man. His personality that killed was a woman. And I marked female. I was originally unsure which gender I should mark for that because they profiled them as a team. And I thought he's an accomplice to himself. But then I eventually decided he killed as a woman, mark woman. And then the first time the ratio hit 84-16 was Full Tilt Boogie. And from then on until the end, it kind of went back and forth between these 2 ratios. But in the earlier seasons, there were way less female. And so up until like season 8, it bounced between 90-10 and 88-12, usually somewhere between there for the earlier seasons. So we have the most featured criminals. We have Everett Lynch, the chameleon, who's appeared in 6 episodes from the end of season 14 to the end of the show. He originally gets away, but is ultimately killed after not killing Rossi and causing Reed to almost die. Then we have Peter Lewis, aka Mr. Scratch. He appeared in 6 episodes from season 10, episode 21 to season 13, episode 1. And although he was caught at first, after drugging Hotch, he breaks out and commits more crimes. George Foyet the Reaper, 6 episodes from season 4 to season 5, and at the end he is killed by Hotch. He appears twice in the dying dreams of both Hotch and Reed in season 9 and the last episode. And then Kat Adams appeared in 4 episodes from season 11 to season 15. She gets caught in the first, and although in jail, comes back twice more to emotionally torture Reed. And finally, the show is known for its bookend quotes. So I have some statistics about that as well. Again, this is pretty self-explanatory, but it's just a number of quotes, of opening quotes that each character read. Obviously, Hotch had the most because he was the leader, so he quoted a lot, and he was also in a lot of episodes. And closing quotes, pretty similar. Hotch has the most. Reed is third. Reed and Rossi are second and third. The only quote Elle ever did was one closing quote. And my slideshow was again not working, but here's the overall quotes for each character. I found the percentage of quotes they did if you take the number of episodes they appear in and multiply that by 2, because that's the number of possible quotes there were that they could have quoted. And so I divided the number by the number of episodes, divided it by 2. And so Elle with her one quote was 1.8%. Reed was 13.4. Morgan was 10.2. Prentice was 15.2. JJ was 8.3. Gideon was 51.1. I'm not sure how accurate that number is. I feel like it should be higher. Rossi was 17.2. Garcia was 3.7. Hotch was 22.0. Blake was 8.3. Callahan was 13.0. Lewis was 8.8. Alves 5.8. And Simmons was 5.3%. So as you can tell, Gideon had a medium amount of quotes, but he had the highest percentage because he did so many quotes in the 3 seasons he was there. So it's a little blurry, but you can still see the characters and how many quotes they had. So this first one is Elle. Second one is Reed. Again, he quotes a lot towards the end. These are the episodes where he's in prison. Morgan quotes, I don't know, sporadically, I guess. Prentice quotes a lot at the end when she becomes the leader, and she quotes on the 2 episodes she randomly appears in. JJ has a couple of quotes. They're, again, pretty sporadic. This is Gideon. He does almost every single one. He does at least one in almost every single one. And Rossi does a lot as well because he kind of takes over for Gideon, but then once Gideon leaves, gives other characters more of an opportunity to quote. Garcia really only quotes on episodes that have plots about her. Hotch, again, is the leader, so he does a lot of them. Blake does a handful, Callahan does a handful, these 3 do a handful. And then the other category consists of Ian Doyle doing one, Ashley Seaver doing one, Jack Garrett, I forget which spinoff guy he is, but he's one of them. Stephen Walker does 4, and then Crystal Rossi's wife does 1. And this one is 2 unsubs doing 1. So observations, as I said, Gideon did almost every quote, and then when he left, Hotch and Rossi did a lot, and then Reed started quoting a lot, especially when Hotch left. If there's a plot about a character, they are more likely to quote at least one. In episodes that revolve around kids or kidnapping, Hotch and JJ, who have kids, quote often. And then the episodes with no quotes are Doubt, Derek, 27, and In the End. The episode And Back did not have an end quote, but rather a monologue by Hotch about how sometimes there is no quote. I did count that as a quote. Nietzsche gets quoted quite a bit. And then Family Tree from season 15 is the only episode to have an unsub quote, and both open and close are unsubs. However, the opening one is the unsub from that episode, and the closing one is Everett Lynch, who comes back in the episode right after that one. And now I have the first half for second half. What's easy about this show is the halfway point is directly between seasons 7 and 8. So the first half is seasons 1 through 7. The second half is seasons 8 through 15. So ratings comparison for crimes. Obviously, there was a higher average rating overall in first and second half. And most of these went down. Arson actually went up just a little bit. There were no rapes in the second half. There were no mayhems in the first half. Terrorism went down. Spree killer went down. Stalking actually remained the same somehow. And then other actually went up. I think that was the only one that went up. In the first half, arson was the lowest and terrorism was the highest. And in the second half, bombing was the lowest and other was the highest. And it definitely has something to do with the episode Entropy, the highest rated, which was under the other category. Now rating comparison of characters. The asterisk just means that they weren't there for the entire half. But if we look at the ones that did carry over, Reed is the highest in both, but it still decreases. Morgan increases. Prentice decreases quite a bit. JJ decreases a little bit. Rossi actually also increases. And then Garcia increases a lot, but is still the lowest in both. And then Hotch decreases as well. And next we have the male versus female criminals in the first half. As you can see, in the first half, there was much fewer females. It was not quite twice as many, maybe 2/3. About 2/3 as many criminals in the second half as in the first half. But then what I noticed is in season 8, there was like an exceptionally high in that one season compared to all of the other seasons. Season 8 had like a lot of female criminals. And then finally, weird things I kept track of. Why did I keep track of these things? After watching several seasons, I began to notice things weren't happening or were happening way too much. So I kept track of the episodes in which these things occurred. First, weird eye stuff. So I'm very disturbed by like lobotomies and nucleation, poking in the eye. And so I kept track of the episodes where this stuff happened. Interestingly, the first 2 were in Oklahoma, which is part of the reason I kept track of that as well. In the first 100 episodes, there was the episode The Eyes Have It, which was number 95. In the second 100, there were 3, and in the third 100, there were 2. Yeah, basically, I was very disturbed by all of this. Second is lesbians. So for the first 12 seasons, there were several homosexual main characters, victims, and killers, but I noticed that none were women. So I started keeping track every time there were lesbians. Interestingly, none of the first few directly actually said they were gay. But in A Good Husband, the killer was a gay man, and his husband went to live with a lesbian couple. So I marked there are several background lesbians in that episode. In Red Light, the criminals are lesbians. And Lucky Strikes, a female victim had a girlfriend. And in Awakenings, one criminal and a victim were together. And that is the most lesbian representation in this show, all after 12 seasons. And finally, Reed's absences. So as you saw, the lowest 3 of the series were consecutive, and those were the first 3 that Reed was not in. When he returns in Entropy, that's the highest rated. And as I said before, I read the IMDb reviews for these episodes, and several people gave low ratings specifically mentioning weak plots and no Reed. Reed also misses a handful of episodes in season 13 and 14 because he's teaching. And although several other characters missed an episode or 2 without formally leaving, I kept track of Reed because of the immediate correlation with low ratings. Lewis also missed several because he was doing like a research assignment, I believe. But if you look at the ratings for these, they're all pretty low. But most of them are gone. Most of them are low because he's gone for most of them because he's visiting his mom or he's teaching. And that is the end. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something weird or interesting about this show in the process.